to the Youthwork Plus podcast. I'm Becky Lawrence, your host, and I'm joined today by our guest, who is the lovely John Prockter. I first met him, I think during COVID, was it? We had a Zoom.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So early on in Youthwork Plus life, sort of we connected, and we've been friends ever since. We've met up a couple of times, and we've stayed connected through the internet because we don't live local to each other.
No.
But yeah, I'll let John introduce himself a little bit more and tell you where he's from. And yeah, off you go, John.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really pleased to talk to you. A recorded conversation. So my name is John Prockter. I'm based in Shropshire. I actually live in Telford, and I'm a youth and schools worker, I guess is the best way to talk about it. There's a few mildly grand sounding titles, but really, first and foremost, I work with young people. I love working with young people, and actually the other day someone asked me the same question, what do you do? And I said I don't know if I was tired or whether I had a stroke of genius, but I said, I'm a storyteller. And that was it. That was all I said. They were like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I'm a storyteller. That's it. But yeah, I work with young people, and I actually do love telling stories. So that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And John, how, when, and why did you get into youth and kids work and ministry stuff? How did that happen?
Yeah. So it's a bit. So it is. I can condense it, but it's a bit of a long story because I became a Christian when I was 14, and almost to the day I felt a calling into youth and children's ministry. My local church had a great youth and children's ministry with lots of volunteers, lots of people who were there to kind of spend time with us and to love us and to create some wonderful experiences for us. But I was also really nurtured by a local Youth for Christ team as well. And so I had this kind of like the church on one side and the Youth for Christ team on the other. And I remember, the night I became a Christian, the almost immediate response was, let's get into the children's club at my church. So I became like a leader at the children's club, and then I became a leader at the youth club when I got a bit older. And then during my A-levels, I managed to negotiate being a schools worker in other secondary schools while I was doing my A-levels. And I think my head of sixth form just let me do it out of just sheer exasperation at me, because I didn't really want to be there, and that we kind of came up with an agreement that I would just never do schools ministry in my own school. But then as soon as I finished A-levels, I went into gap year training, and then into full-time ministry off the back of that. So I really can sort of trace back that the same night that I gave my life to Jesus was the same night he called me into youth and schools ministry. And I've not done, apart from a little job in McDonald's, a little job in a bar, a little job with a van, I've not done anything else my entire life since I was 14.
Wow. And how have you ended up in the role you are at now? And tell us a little bit more about that and what that entails.
Yeah. So the role I'm in now is, I say I'm a youth worker and I'm a storyteller. I'm the director of a little organisation called Catalyst Youth Trust, and that's based in Shropshire, and I've got a real heart for Shropshire. But how we ended up in this area, there's a bit of sadness in that. I was living and working, and I got married in the Southwest. My wife and I had our first two kids in the Southwest, and we felt this call on our lives to be sort of working in an area. There was an area in East Devon where, we were based in a town called Exmouth, a coastal town, which is the same town my wife grew up in. Yeah. And I felt that God had called me to an area ministry, to kind of, love an area, to resource the people, to to find ways of making a difference and stuff. And I had this call, and I was like, great, this must be now. So I re kind of jigged my work. The trust that I was working for were really supportive. They helped me rejig everything I was doing so that I could, in a sense, get out of the local, daily stuff and focus more on the area. Well, what happened was we were so effective at doing that I ended up being unemployed, because although I really felt that God had called me to this area of ministry, it clearly wasn't the right time. And I look back at it now and I go, okay, well, God was calling us to this area of ministry in the Midlands, but we could never have guessed that, because I'd lived in the Southwest for 14 years. I grew up in Lincoln, but God had called me down to the Southwest. I just assumed when he said area ministry that's what he meant.
Yeah.
But actually, it took a redundancy, leaving our friends and my wife's family, and moving to Bridgnorth and pioneering again in a new ministry, in a new area where there were very few youth and schools ministry projects.
Yeah.
And after a few years here, it became really obvious that we had quite naturally stepped into an area role without really trying. It was the trust was supportive. People were looking to us for input, and I think there's a bit of wisdom, isn't it? When someone is given a role, it's often a role they have already stepped into, and that you can recognise that that's a role that they can do. And I think maybe in the Southwest, God was saying to me, yeah, this is in the future, but you're not quite there yet. And then when we moved to Bridgnorth, we tried a little less to make that area thing happen. And then in the end, really and truly, I was kind of the last one to recognise that it had happened. I remember a conversation with a mentor of mine who was like, what are you waiting for? There was almost this sort of thing of like, are you not man enough? Come on. You know that what God's called you to. And so there was basically this point where we were working in Bridgnorth, and it became really obvious that I was basically giving away most of my time to area ministry, and it came to a point where a couple of really influential people in my life, people who influenced me a lot, were like, it's time. And so I gave up half of my employment in Bridgnorth. And we started to set up this thing called Catalyst, which has since planted a schools ministry in Telford and kind of blessed people around the area in lots of different ways. But that is very, our journey in that sense is, I guess, plagued a bit with disappointment, if I put it like that. But actually, God's timing is wonderful. And then you're looking for it, and then you don't see it when it happens. I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that. That's honest answer. And how has God led, moved, or changed you along the way, John?
I think when I started in youth ministry, I had a very deep self-belief. It was like, I'm born to this. I'm chosen into this. There's a lot of kind of prophetic words in the late 90s in my life, or the mid 90s actually. Come to think of it, the mid 90s. There was it was a very prophetic time in the church. All of the music was very kind of future casting. There was a real kind of excitement about revival, and about this generation being revival bringers. And I was right in the middle of that. And I think that my ego and those kind of prophetic words didn't really kind of go very, very well together. So when I first got into full-time youth ministry, I I think perhaps it'd be charitable to myself to say that I was young and a bit full of myself. But in all honesty, some of my really good friends I'd hear them describe me to other people like, oh, when you get to know him, you'll really like him. He seems like he's got a big head, but when you get to know him, and I think the way that God has kind of moved over the years in me is increasing my love for people. There was this long period where I felt like I was the good news. You've never. Do you know what, Becky? You've never heard anyone deliver a talk like me. You've never seen anyone perform like a sketch like me. There was almost this thing of like, it's like until you've experienced me do it, you've probably only had like a second, third-rate experience in your youth ministry, and that was something I really struggled with, and it took a long time to recognize it. And that ego, I think, is the thing that God stripped away. It's almost like, you see those sort of 25-year-olds thrust into leadership, massive leadership. You think, well, they must be really humble, because when I was 25, God was preparing me for being made redundant in a position and kind of leaving a place feeling like I didn't quite get it. And I think that the way that God has kind of moved in my life very much is like, it's loving people first. It's loving Jesus first. It's, it's whatever talent I think I've got, third, fourth, fifth, dismal XYZ, whatever, at the very, very back. But it took a long time to do that, to understand that. And I think, I think I'm perhaps just a bit slow. It's like all the things that God's trying to teach me. I'm 45 now, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of understanding the level of compassion and love for people that I'm perhaps supposed to have. And I think back to me as an 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old, and I just think, oh my goodness, you're such an idiot. It didn't matter, It doesn't matter that you're a musician. Who cares? Like, it doesn't matter that you're good at this, that, or the other. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. But people still introduce themselves to me and say, "Oh, I knew you in like 2000," and I feel embarrassed that I don't recognize them. But that was kind of the state of my brokenness, I guess, my ego. And that's the area that I believe that God has been working on the most with me, particularly kind of continually putting people in front of me that need loving and being like, okay, maybe you'll get it if I put this person in front of you. Okay, maybe I will, or maybe I won't. And I think that's the big thing that I feel like God has been kind of molding me in throughout the years, and I still feel like I've got so far to go, to be honest.
Yeah, and would you say that's also the biggest lesson you've learned, or is there anything else that God sort of taught you along the way?
No, I think that is. I'd say that is the biggest lesson. Yeah, that's the biggest lesson. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and have you got any highlights from past or present that have like kept you going, or that have really encouraged you in your journey?
I mean, highlights in terms of work. I'm so proud of the projects that we've planted. We planted a project in Tavistock, which is called Catalyst Tavistock, which is still there. And obviously, when I say we, I mean me and church leaders and people who loved that place. And I was the face of it, and then my would become my wife became someone who worked alongside me there. That was absolutely massive. I think ministry in Exmouth was particular highlights there. There was a real social action edge there, and the churches were really keen on making a difference to the people who were experiencing poverty. And one thing that I think probably your listeners know, I know you will get this, is that the biggest unity projects are often youth working projects, because it's the one thing we can all agree on. So there was this moment in Exmouth where there was a big unity project around young people, and the young people were interested in social action, which meant that the biggest unity project was actually a kind of an anti-poverty thing. We run this thing called Love Exmouth. And it was years ago. But we did crazy things like build fences for people, replace doors, installed home security, renovate gardens, like painted, outhouses, deep clean patios, got, take debris off people's roofs, just things that made a big difference to people's lives. And that was led through the young people, and I think like that will always stick with me as a massive highlight of where the unity that surrounds youth ministry can be mobilized for other parts of the church because the young people are driving it. And so that was a big highlight.
Yeah, good highlight. And have you got a fun question for me?
The question that I want to ask you is so dramatically irrelevant to anything. But when we met together, I first came across your community robots. When we were sat and there were robots. I wanted to ask you.
Well, they're not mine, but yeah,
they're not your robots. But I wanted to ask you, like, how often do you use those robots?
So what John's referring to is here in Milton Keynes, where I'm based, we've got these little robots that work like delivery bots. So they can deliver groceries, fast food, all sorts of things. And they sort of we've got what we call a redway system here, which is like a footpath cycleway route that pretty much spans the whole city. And the robots use those, so they don't need to cross that many roads and stuff because they go like under underpasses and things like that. That's the robots that John's referring to. They're not in any way mine.
That's right. The Youthwork Plus robot system, yeah.
So yeah, I can't remember. We have ordered things from them. I think when they first came out, I think maybe a couple of years ago now, we ordered more stuff from them because it was a bit more of a novelty.
Yeah.
So it sort of, when we order from them personally, like it brings it to the edge of our drive, so you have to like leave the house and go out and get stuff. So we obviously used them during the pandemic because it was really convenient for bringing groceries and stuff. Obviously they fit a limited amount of things in there. They're sort of, I don't know, like 80 centimeters by 60 centimeters or something. Is the size of it, so it can fit probably like 2 grocery bags in there of stuff. And they're either sort of insulated with cool blocks and stuff if you've got frozen or fridge stuff in there, or they've got like a padded liner for when they have like hot takeaway food in there. But one of the cool things about them is, like, if you've got like a special occasion or something, like say you were ordering something like a birthday cake or a treat for someone for a special occasion, you can get it to play a specific song when it like arrives at that person's house.
That is so cool.
So it genuinely is the future, I feel like.
Wow.
But
I feel a little bit unfair. I've just made you talk for 2 minutes about robots. Let me ask you a proper question, because
go on.
I feel like when I track back my journey, I really do feel like failure has been at the forefront of everything that I've grown through. But I also feel like I'm always the last person to understand or know what it is that God wants me to do. Everyone else always seems to see it first. So what I really want to ask you is kind of what failure do you think has shaped your ministry, or can you remember a time when you were the last one to realize that God was telling you something?
Let me have a think. I'm sure there have been failures, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think like there's probably been lots of times where I've tried to run things and it just hasn't worked out. Like I've thought, oh, this will be a really good idea. We'll run this. Like we tried to do one of my previous jobs. We tried to do an allotment with young people. So I was thinking like, this is a really good activity. Like we can get our community young people involved and our church young people, and it can be a really cool activity they could do together. And we can do it on a Saturday. So I put together this whole like little program, and so the allotment was like one of the creative things that they could do.
Yeah.
And then there was like other stuff, like there was some music stuff they could do. There was some like crafty creative stuff. And it was like a rolling monthly program kind of thing with something, I think every Saturday or every other Saturday. And I thought to myself, like, oh, this is a really good little plan I've put together. This is a really good idea. There's loads of stuff they can really tap into. And then it was just like a complete flop. Like hardly any young people came along to it. I think we had like one or two young people come along to the different stuff that we did. And it was just like one of those things where I'd like thrown all the energy behind it and thought it was going to be amazing.
And no one came. Oh my
and then,
days.
No one really came, and I just thought, oh, yeah, this just hasn't worked. And similarly, like in I think pretty much there's been a little bit of a theme, I guess, through all my roles where I've always tried to do stuff that's been similar to you, John, supportive of other people doing kids and youth ministry.
Yeah.
So trying to get together local people in a network, or trying to get people to meet together for breakfast or coffee to sort of peer support each other and bounce ideas off each other. And sometimes that has really worked, where like I've built good connections with people.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I've invited people to stuff and that's just really flopped as well. And I've been like, oh, this is really hard work. And I think that's one of the times where I think I've probably felt the most deflated, because like I've put loads of effort in trying to encourage people and trying to get people together, because I know how important it's been for me in my ministry. And people just haven't seen it, or like have been too busy, or like the timing hasn't been right or whatever, and it just hasn't worked out. So those are a couple of faily moments, I think. And in terms of like calling and ministry and stuff, I kind of, the character I sort of resonate with the most, I think, from the Bible is Moses, in the sense that God kind of called him to his ministry, and he was like, "Are you sure me? You sure you mean me?"
Yeah.
And I think I've always felt that in my roles in youth ministry, really. Like I've always been like, when God's called me to stuff, I've always been like, "Oh, you're talking to me? You mean me? Like, are you sure? You sure I've got the skills and the like the wisdom and the like the stuff to be able to do this?" So yeah, that's.
But it's so. I just think it's so hard because that whole thing of, are you sure it's me? And then you have some success, but also some failures, and you start to tell yourself the story of like, well, maybe I was wrong the whole time.
Yeah.
It's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard. And my thing is always that I'll be doing something for a long time, and then someone who I really respect will say, why haven't you got on with it? I'm like, got on with what? They're like, this thing. And it's like, it's right in front of my face, and I'm agonizing over it. A very well-known Christian leader who in the youth work world, everybody listening will know, just under 12 months ago, said to me, if you don't get on with it, and I'm not going to tell you the person and the situation, but he literally was so frustrated with me that he went, if you don't get on with it, the next time I see you, I'm going to punch you in the face. Right? And it was a funny moment, like he wasn't serious. But that's the level of frustration that I think the people who lead me have at how slow I am. Where they're like, it's obvious, get on with it. Like, no, I'm not sure. Like maybe like my motivation's still wrong, or maybe it's not the right time. Maybe the ego is still taking over a little bit. They're like, no, just come on. I'm like the most wonderfully calm people being like, I'm gonna actually punch you in the face if you don't
Yeah.
if you don't just get on with it. I'm so slow.
I think like similarly, like I resonate with that because I feel like with some of the things that God's called me to, I've procrastinated too long because I've just been like, I can't do it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
can't, I don't know where to begin or I don't know where to start kind of thing. So I've just like dragged my feet a lot.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then like God's dropped people in place to like be the people who've been like, come on, like I'm here now, like
Lovingly
let's get
remind
cracking.
you of God's
Yeah.
faithfulness. That's right.
Yeah. But then I think as also hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Because then
Hmm.
I think although I've felt lots of times like, am I the right person for this role?
Yeah,
Like looking back, like weaved through my story
yeah,
is just like God at work preparing me for those things.
right.
But it's like I haven't noticed it until I've looked back, kind of thing. I haven't noticed it at the time.
Yeah, got you.
It's only
Yeah.
when I've looked back, I've thought, oh, right, yeah, that thing or that experience or that project I was involved in actually
Hmm.
has given me the skills for what I need to do now.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
I
that's
didn't
right.
realize it before.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
wow, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that.
No,
Good questions.
no, good. Well, I'm enjoying chatting with you. It's good.
Yeah. John, what area of youth, kids, family ministry are you the most passionate about and why?
Um, I've been asked this question quite a lot, and I think my most honest answer is that as I get older, the answer changes.
Yeah.
I feel like I've become someone who is growing and changing in ministry as I get older. Like for example, when I was like I don't know 19, perhaps to when I was 30, I would always say, you know, mentoring or discipling 14, 15-year-olds.
Mm.
That's my sweet spot. That's what gives me life. That's my jam. But as I got older, um, I've actually grown quite a love for children's ministry, and
Mm.
it might be because my youngest is still in that mode, and so I've become more playful, perhaps as I've got
Yeah.
older.
Mm.
When my oldest, sorry, was young, I was still in that mode where, in a sense, the youngest got passed around teenagers. But now my youngest is sort of almost at the bottom end of where I start with young people now.
Mm.
And I think that's quite a challenge because I like to think that I'm this sort of youth worker.
Mm.
But sometimes I just love children's work. And I also really love the idea that if I know a kid or a kid knows me when they're, I don't know, 7, that they're going to know me for a good 7, 8 years. If I'm passionate, not just about, for example, I'm still passionate about mentoring 14, 15-year-olds. I'm
Mm.
passionate about sharing Jesus with teenagers across the board. But if I know these young people in play
Mm.
and in events where they are really switched on by activity and storytelling and things, if I
Yeah.
know them younger, then that's a great benefit. And I wonder whether, in a way, the best answer to the question is that as each year goes on, I kind of add a little skill to my tool belt. And I'm
Yeah.
not the master of many of them,
Yeah.
but I love play and I love storytelling. I love running events with children where it's such a pure joy and excitement. But then I also have a group of 20 teenagers that I meet with on a Sunday night. And we they're like a range of churched and unchurched, and we run a group that we call Stir. And that's very much a little community. So we're eating together, we play together, we read the Bible together, we share each other's lives. That's lovely. and I love that group. But there's such a range now that I'm not entirely certain where my sweet spot is. But
Yeah.
when I was younger, I would have been like, you can take your children's work and you can sack it, whereas now I'm like, yeah, let's play, come on,
Yeah.
I think I've become perhaps a lot more kind of secure in having a wider range of things that I love. I try really
Yeah.
hard actually to have landmarks in the year with a range of different disciplines, play and storytelling and activity and bodies orbs on a field, or whatever it is, mentoring a kid in school, running a discipleship group, leading a big camp, working with youth workers, all the different disciplines I like to kind of pepper through the year
Yeah.
at those sort of important times. But that is perhaps something I would say perhaps over the last 6-7 years has become more important. And I really enjoy having that kind of range of passion now.
Yeah, that's good. I think I'd say similar. Like, I think for a lot of years I was always like, yeah, kids' work's not my wheelhouse. That's other people can do that. Whereas I think, at least the last sort of 5 years, 6 years, like one of my roles has been youth and kids worker. So I've had to do a lot more kids stuff. But then I think I always saw them as quite separate things, whereas I think now in my head they're a lot more joined up, like you say, than they are separate. And I think once you can do one, you can do both. For most people. I think you just, because all it is essentially is thinking about who your audience are, how you're going to engage them, and then putting something together that's going to be suitable.
And it is difficult. Like, I would say for sure that there are some children's workers out there that have a very distinct calling, and they have an energy which I don't have as a youth worker. But there's something wonderfully transitional about a youth worker running children's work. Essentially, what you end up doing is running something that's aspirational. So, like, I know I'll never be as good as a proper children's worker. Like, I really respect those people, and if I've got something really important, I tend to hire them in because I'm like, I need what you bring that I'm missing. Ultimately, when I do children's ministry, it looks a bit like a youth worker doing children's ministry. But that's quite helpful, because in some ways that's preparing the younger people for a slightly different mode, which some of them are going to be really there for. And I wouldn't say that, when I say children's ministry, I'm talking perhaps 7+, whereas a children's worker would be thinking more holistically about the child. I'd be thinking more, and I said this a minute ago, and I'd like to repeat it so that it's not missed, is that what I'm looking for is, I'm 45, I look a bit like a dad, and as a youth worker, I play the role often as father figure. I can't get away from it. It's who I am. So when I'm doing children's ministry, I'm really preparing the way for those young people in my area to know me as teenagers. So I'm taking an interest, and I'm valuing play. Doesn't mean that I'm a particularly good children's worker, but I'm valuing the time that they have and that I have with them. Because every kid, and this happened the other day with a school that I hadn't been in for a little while, I went and did an assembly for year 10. And the amount of kids in there who they were like, oh, you're the guy from my primary school. You're the guy from that event. You're the guy from the field when we did that thing. And I think that's the thing. Like, I may not be able to make a daily difference in the life of a child, but I can be there at landmark moments to help and support, so that as teenagers, they've got an anchoring to someone who's been there, in their perception, their entire life. For me, it's 5 years. For them, it's their entire life.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's something really helpful there for us, is that we don't just wait for the teenagers to arrive. We actually express an interest in them when they're younger, not just like, oh, you're cool. I know that we'd never say this, but you're either old enough or cool enough to be in our teenager group. For a young person, they're waiting to arrive, and there's this kind of like distant, slightly unapproachable youth worker that they can't talk to yet. Well, I'd much prefer to go and meet them when they're younger and spend time with them, so that they know, well, when I'm old enough, I'm just going to continue to hang out with John and his team. I think that there's something much better about that, where they know that you're there for them. And I want the kids to be like, I want them to go home and go, man, that guy from primary school, he's still there. And they'll be like, man, he must be ancient if he was there in my primary school. It's like, no, mate, it was just the other day. Do you know what I mean? Like, for us, it's like, it was just last year, but actually for them, it makes a big difference because you're part of the whole story of their lives.
Yeah. And there is something beautiful, isn't there, about continuity and consistency in that?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So how would you, just unpacking that a little bit more, like if there is someone who is a youth worker who isn't involved in any kids ministry, what sort of tips could we give them for getting involved in a little way? Because obviously we're not asking them to also get involved on the kids work rota and be there just as much as they are involved in the youth work. But it's like finding little ways, isn't it, to sort of weave your way in and be known.
Yeah. I think the phrase that I used a minute ago was landmark moments. So, like, I mean, I'll use the example of my area here.
Yep.
Open the Book are there every week in primary school. Those wonderful people, including the chair of my trust, he's on an Open the Book team every week, right? I can't do that. I just can't do it. Like, I've got to focus on other things. But also I don't need to replicate Open the Book. What I can do, though, is go at landmark moments and let the first thing that comes out of my mouth be, my friends at Open the Book, I'm here today to talk to you about so-and-so and so-and-so. Do something fun and youth worky, like in front of a primary assembly. If you only did it 3 or 4 times a year, they would still remember you. And I think that's really important. The other thing I think that you can do is prioritize the landmarks and serve when your children's teams are doing things like, and I appreciate not everyone does this, but when they're doing things like experience Christmas or experience Easter or experience Pentecost there are landmark times when you can say, I'll come. And I think it is appropriate for the youth worker in the room to be given a couple of minutes to say, hey, you're going to, you're going to know me for a few years. The phrase that I use actually with young people is, you don't know this yet, but we're going to be friends for the next 7 years.
Yeah.
And I really try and instill that in primary kids as early as possible. Particularly when I do transitions workshops, that's another thing that youth workers can do. Get into year 6 and provide a transitions workshop, either with something you've written yourself or steal it from someone else or do the It's Your Move thing from Scripture Union. Just go and do a transitions workshop. All you need, it's not difficult. You just need a space where you get them to reflect on what they're leaving behind and reflect on what they're about to pick up. What are you afraid of? What are you excited about? What are you going to miss? These are really simple things for a youth worker to do. Play a game, ask them questions, let them ask you questions, take in a year 7, I don't know. It's not difficult. But what you're doing in there is being a landmark person to say, you're going to know me for the next 5 to 6 years of your life.
Yeah.
We're going to be best mates.
Yeah.
You're inviting them in to the rest of your ministry, and I think that is so helpful. And it doesn't have to be all the time, just these landmark moments, just creating those spaces where they're going to remember you. And again, another phrase I use all the time is, okay, 100 of you, I'm not going to recognize you when you're wearing your secondary school uniform. You have to shout to me because I'm not going to know. You're going to look different. You're going to do your hair different. So make certain, please, 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 that you prod at me, shout, John. I'll recognize you as soon as you point me out. But I always say that. I'm like, I want to know you. I want to be a part of your life. So if you want me to be a part of your life, make certain that you push me in the shoulder when you get to secondary school, because you're going to be wearing different clothes and it changes everything. Nobody recognized Clark Kent and Superman. It's the same problem with you. I'm not going to recognize you. Anyway,
yeah, I agree. And John, why do you think engaging children and young people with church is really important?
Well, they need engaging with something. I mean, come up with something better. I think I've never particularly understood anyone who thinks that engaging in like a church community would be bad news, because young people need a community to hook into. And if you don't provide that, they'll create it for themselves.
Yep.
Or they'll find someone else's community. I think it is so centrally important for us as we grow to have that nurturing village around us who's around. And it doesn't always have to be a traditional Sunday morning. It just has to be an expression of church, preferably as part of the leadership of a church. For example, my Sunday night group is actually a parachurch thing, but there's an agreement with the churches that they send leaders. They're of various ages. And when we're together, we talk and we go through the disciplines of what it means to be a part of church, even though it's not a Sunday morning. It's a Sunday night in a youth centre. It doesn't matter where it is, but young people have got to have those rhythms instilled in their lives. And that it's quite a traditional idea, really. It's quite sort of old-fashioned, but a daily, weekly, termly, yearly rhythm is so helpful. And again, if we don't do that as part of church community, then young people will find it somewhere else. But it's so important and it's so formative. There's this old guy who's like a church leader, and he passed away a few years ago. And he used to say to me, when your eldest, so he was talking about my kids, when your eldest is at an age where they're wanting to express their kind of social life and their clubs and all that different stuff, you've got to put down your rhythms to pick up their rhythms with them. He was talking about things like being there to drive them, being there to be there in their experiences. And I think this is something that I'm not saying that we miss this, but it's really important for us as we grow. To be the adult in the room means to sacrifice your rhythms for the sake of the new rhythms of the next generation. So I have very little sympathy. I'm very kind, Becky, but I'll say this on your podcast. I have very little sympathy for people who don't have time for young people. You're not that busy. Your program isn't that important. There is space for us all to help young people to establish godly rhythms in their lives. I understand, obviously, young families need to protect their families. Parents with teenagers need to, I get that all the time. But when you actually delve into what people are doing with their lives, particularly in evenings, well, it really only consists of sitting down, watching telly or scrolling on your phone. And you can't ever tell me that that's more important than forming a rhythm for young people that's going to set them up for the rest of their lives. You know, you might have got bored. Okay, fine. You might be overtired. I get it. So am I. But like the great Ariana Grande said recently in her song, in case you hadn't noticed, everybody's tired. Lovely little line. I can't believe that I'm quoting Ariana Grande, but it's a great little line. In case you hadn't noticed, everybody's tired.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when we kind of say we need help, put our hands up and say we need volunteers, we need help, we need people who feel called to youth ministry, we get nothing. Like, don't tell me that you're that busy, people. There's somebody in this room who's ignoring what God's calling them to do. And I think, you know, it's our job to tease that out, to be kind to people. But on a Youthwork podcast, is it all right to say it's deeply frustrating and very annoying?
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Yeah. But it is, and I think, you know, our highest priority should be to create rhythms of church with young people, in, you know, church young people, unchurched young people, because if they don't have that, then they're missing out.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally, like, young people, they need to know they have a choice, don't they, about what they believe. And I think sometimes they don't even, I know from being involved in schools ministry and stuff, a lot of young people don't even realise they have that choice.
Yeah.
That there's a choice available.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, sometimes it's understanding that perspective ourselves as adult Christians.
Yeah. But here's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, do we believe that God has created a rhythm that is fundamentally holy? If the answer is yes, then we have to teach that rhythm and reveal it and be there to, as you say, provide those sort of choices for young people so that they can see what it's all about. If we don't do that, then we're just letting them down.
Yeah. Yeah. And you haven't mentioned it so far, John, but I know that you have something to promote that it'd be good to tell our listeners about, because you've been working on a book resource, I'm going to call it, because it's not just a book, it's not just a resource. I think it's like an all-encompassing thing. But yeah, I'll let you unpack a little bit more about what it is and how people can get involved in it and how they might be able to use it.
Well, that's really kind of you. Thank you. And I would have been happy with this conversation not even mentioning it if that was a thing. But it's really kind of you. So we have this new resource called Hikaru. It's basically an anime world. And the very first thing that is relevant to say is that this anime world is an allegory of our faith in Jesus. So it's actually a novel. And the novel is designed to unpack the gospel in a complete way. So it's a fantasy epic, if you like. But then at the end of the book, there's an actual explanation of the gospel written by me, and really showing and helping young people to even make a decision for Jesus. So that's the novel. Now, because I've been doing youth and children's and schools work for so long, when I was writing this novel, I really wanted to make certain that it was also a schools work resource. And so we've created 3 schools work workshops, one for Key Stage 2, which is very much just about the purpose and worth of allegory as storytelling. And in that workshop, we unpack the gospel. The Key Stage 3 workshop is more about resilience, but again, we unpack the gospel. And then the Key Stage 4 resource is really beliefs about Jesus and using the same anime world. And again, we unpack the gospel. So all 3 of those resources are schools work resources. And it's multimedia. We have a score. We've got Hikaru music. The resources are really high quality. There's video. There's big artwork, and it's quite compelling. And I mean, the book itself was released in November, but prior to the book being released, we did this workshop as a trial to about 1,000 kids. Now, since the workshop has been since the book has been released, we've been doing the workshop with the book, and we've been giving a part of the book away. Now, just in the last 2 months, we've done this workshop for about 600 students, and before July, we will have done this workshop and given away over 1,000 copies of the book. Now, the actual full novel's available on Amazon. You can get church copies, which are available on the Catalyst Youth Trust website, which is catalystyouthtrust.co.uk. They're at quite a discount. You can book me to do schools workshops, and there's a whole workshop structure which includes actually putting the gospel in the kids' hands. And I'm finding lots of schools are really amenable to that. And then there's a new part of it which we're putting together at the moment, which is for churches and helping churches to unpack Hikaru. And the main thrust of this is that young people and adults really struggle first and foremost to pick up the Bible. And so what I really wanted to do was to provide something which switched on these young people spiritually, really stirred them towards Jesus with a closely written allegory, which really does point to Jesus. But then within it contains actual kind of Bible study so that young people can actually kind of get into the Bible. So that's like the main thrust of it. And the big thing that I say to everybody is, if you've got a heart for young people knowing Jesus, then they're probably anime fans. They probably love manga. And this is something I say in the workshops that we do, is that anime hasn't changed stylistically for 30 plus years. Pokemon was released in 96, 97. There was an old movie called Akira, which was released in 1988. And the thing about Hikaru is that it looks the same as Akira, looks the same as Pokemon. The anime art style is quite timeless, which means that as soon as a young person sees it, they get it. They look at it and they know what that fantasy world is all about. Except that in our case, they're getting Jesus, which is wonderful. So it's something that people can buy, something that people can give to young people. You can get me into schools, and there's all sorts of different resources with that as well. Yeah, it's exciting. I'm really enjoying myself.
Yeah, it is a great resource, and I think slightly different than what's out there.
Yeah.
That is readily available, which makes it something that potentially could engage young people who aren't engaging with other stuff. I think is one of the magic things about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know many authors who are youth workers and who are looking to write narrative. So it's a narrative resource.
Yeah.
But that also unpacks the gospel. And I think I'd always be really careful to say it's unique, but I can't find anything like it. And I think that's something that is really good for us, because what it means is that Hikaru could very easily be another string to your bow or another tool in your toolkit. It's not the toolkit. It's like everything.
Yeah.
Alpha isn't the whole toolkit. Stir is not the whole toolkit. And there's many, Youthscape are doing their best to create the entire toolkit, and they do it very, very well. But you need all of the tools in your tool belt so that you can pull out something and say, this is what's going to switch this kid on. And what I'm finding is that anime allegorical storytelling, this Hikaru world, is something that is really switching young people on, that they're genuinely excited about. The biggest criticism that I get from young people is that the book's not long enough. I'm like, my goodness, it's 35,000 words. Like, it's pretty all right. It's
Yeah.
not a 60,000 word epic, but I need Hikaru to be read by kind of 8 to 14, 15-year-olds. And the real readers are like, I read it twice, it's too short. Like, it's a lot of words. I worked for a long time on it. Anyway. Yeah, it's cool.
Well done, John, and thanks for sharing it with us.
No, thank you so much.
I'll try and post it on some of our socials, and there will be a review of it at some point in our recommended resource library.
Oh, thank you. And the full name of it, I don't think I said the full name of it. So
go on.
It's called Hikaru, Name Above All Names. So there is a manga called Hikaru, and I believe that Hikaru, Name Above All Names is ranked above it, which is great. But yeah, so it's Hikaru, Name Above All Names, and it's the one that says it's written by John Prockter.
Yeah, and he said it's available on Amazon if you didn't catch that as well.
Yeah. Although if you're a church and you want multiple copies, better to go to catalystyouthtrust.co.uk because we'll give you a 40% discount for church orders.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. And John, lastly, what advice or encouragement would you give for our listeners?
I think that as I'm getting older, the advice that I give to everyone is, if you're struggling to figure out how to open up a new area in ministry, go and find someone who's kind of blazed that trail before you. It's really important, I think, to spend the time finding out why someone else was successful, why someone else failed. I really value spending time with other people in that way. And I think that's the kind of encouragement that I give to listeners, to work on hearing from other people as much as you can. People are always surprised, for example, when I say that I meet with the chair of my trust every week. And people often say to me, like, you meet for a couple of hours every week? Yeah, I do. They're like, how do you make the time? Well, how do I not make the time? Because the time I spend with people who are wiser than me drives me. Like, I'm not an island. I can't do it alone. And I need somebody to be able to challenge me. Maybe someone I'm a little bit afraid of. That helps as well. But just finding out really what they can put into me. And I would say that that's something I'll always value or always have. But particularly this area of, spend time with people who've blazed the trail before you. Ask them what they were successful at, what they failed at, just particularly people who've already loved the area that you live in. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that meeting with somebody for accountability thing is really key, isn't it? Or it's peer support from somebody else who's on the journey with you. I think those are two really valuable things.
Yeah.
And not that difficult to set up and do either. Like, it takes a while to get into the habit of doing it.
I try really, really hard not to band my diary around. But let me just say this. I'll say this specifically here. I'll say it intentionally because it's the Youthwork Plus podcast. I've got 3 kids. I'm married. I've got 2 dogs and 2 ducks. I manage 3 charitable trusts. And I'm an author, and I love everything that I do. And I'm still not too busy to sit with the chair of my trust and be ready for some input. And I say that not to say at all, check me out, how cool am I? What I'm saying to you is that none of us are too busy to spend time getting input from people we respect and love. None of us, I know people who spend weeks and months with no input from anybody because they say they're too busy. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. You need it, and that's the longevity plan. That's how you stick at this forever. That's how you don't burn out. Is that you sit with people that you love and respect, and who love and respect you, and you have them ask you difficult questions. Ask them tricky questions. But that's the longevity plan. That's the legacy plan. That's how you stick at it forever. That's how you don't burn out. And that's my encouragement to you.
Yeah. And I think it's just being intentional, isn't it, about finding the time to do that.
Yes.
And it doesn't take a lot, but actually it is really powerful and worth it. Thanks, John. Well, thank you, John, for coming today and for sharing all of what you shared with us. Some of your journey and the stuff about Hikaru and all the tips and shared learning things that you've shared have been really, really useful.
You're welcome. And the Ariana Grande quote.
Yeah, and the Ariana Grande quote. Yeah, that's going to go into the little blurb about this podcast. I think.
Oh my
it's going to make it in there.
I can't believe I quoted Ariana Grande. Sorry.
It's all right. It's relevant. It was relevant.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to our listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like, share, subscribe, comment, and get in touch with us if you want to. I can put you in touch with John if you want to ask him any further questions or chat to him about the book or about anything that he's mentioned about his ministry. Be encouraged in what you're doing if you're involved in kids or youth work, and if you're not, maybe ask yourself why. Find a way to get involved.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'll see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.